Once again, we gather in search of the truth, dark, and mystery. It's the Drunk Turkey Show.
Big development today in the investigation into the murders of 4 University of Idaho students. According to state and local officials and court documents, 28-year-old Bryan Kohberger has been arrested. He was arrested and arraigned this morning in Pennsylvania.
We have new details on what Bryan Kohberger was doing right before his arrest. Police says a tactical team burst in to arrest the Idaho murder suspect. He was in pajamas and latest gloves, stuffing trash into Ziploc bags.
Hey, greetings from the year 3000. It still sucks. This is Philip J. Fry, and you're listening to the Drunken Turkey Show. Your one stop for this sort of thing. Hit that button, like and subscribe. You know what to do, just like every other podcast.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Drunk Turkey Show. I'm Daniel, your host, as always. I want to thank everybody tuning in on, well, we got a few places that we're watching this from. We got Facebook, we got YouTube, as always. That's our biggest platform. I want to thank all our moderators, all our subscribers, everybody that's been tuning in through there. We appreciate you guys. We're over 40,000 subscribers. It's a huge accomplishment. I want to thank everybody for getting us there. We've gotten there some time ago, but I want to thank everybody. We also have Twitch going on, and we also have Rumble and a new platform that is now going live right now. It's going to be TikTok. So we're live on TikTok. It's a different angle than this angle here, and you won't be able to see exactly everything that I'm talking about, but I will be reading a lot of things today. As far as what we have found out in the Bryan Kohberger case, some new details in the Bryan Kohberger case. It's pretty disturbing, in my opinion. Some of the facts, and we'll go through it. A bunch of different documents. We have 2 documents that are over 30 pages, one that's over 175 pages, somewhere around there. And so we'll be looking into all of those. Without further ado, let's get into it. So let's break it down. Now, I will say that throughout the last few years, I have stated a couple of things, and those things that I have stated, like I said, for instance, I said that Bryan Kohberger opened the back sliding glass door, never closed it again, went through the house, did what he did, and then left through the back sliding glass door, not touching it. And that simple fact alone told me that Bryan Kohberger did that solely because he didn't want to touch the door more than he needed to. If he touches the door more than once, then that gives you the, what's the word I'm looking for? So the more times that he touches that sliding glass door is more of an opportunity for him to leave DNA behind, fabric, sweat, blood, any of those type of things. Now, you're going into a crime scene. You're probably nervous. There's some anxiety that's probably going on in there, but it's nothing compared to the adrenaline dump that you got inside, nor nothing compared to, the perspiration, the sweating, the exhaustion that you have come, that person has gone through while committing this type of crime as they're exiting out. And so if they're having to grab something to open the door while they're leaving, that's a huge opportunity for somebody to leave DNA and those type of things behind. What we found out for a fact in these documents, based on tests that law enforcement were able to do, that in fact, indeed was the case. Bryan Kohberger entered the rear sliding glass door once and left the door open. And there's some other, and never closed it again. And they're able to determine that because of some testing they did with dog barking noises coming from Murphy and so on. But we'll be getting into all those and so many other things that we've already known, some new things we never heard about, and so much more. So let's get it down. Let's break it into it. We're going to start first with this document here. This is going to be the order on the defendant's motion for Frank's hearing. And I'm just going to go into some of the new details. I'm not going to go into everything that is in this document. A lot of it is, well, all of it has been denied. All the motions in the Bryan Kohberger case. This is going to be going to trial. He will be standing and standing in trial and defending himself against the murders of Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan. But let's start off with this. There was a hearing that was held on January 23rd, 2025, which we do have the transcript for, and we're also going to be going through some of that transcript as well. In the interest of evidentiary efficiency, the court permitted a full Frank's hearing on the motion only insofar as it pertained to the alleged omission of information regarding the defendant's identification through investigative genetic genealogy, IgG. So that's what basically this entire thing came from, is from a closed hearing that they had. And we, like I said, we do have the transcripts. And let's go through some of these things here. The defendant in issue 2 is contained in Blaker Exhibit A, supporting that the warrant application of defendant's Pullman, Washington apartment and his office at the Washington State University. So this is referencing the warrant for his home or his apartment there in Pullman, and also his office. And the defendant claims that Sergeant Blaker attributes to discovering the knife sheath to the Idaho State Police officers rather than Detective Payne. However, the state correctly notes the defendant's challenge is nothing more than a quibble over semantics. What Sergeant Blaker stated was, I was later advised by ISP investigators that they located a tan leather knife sheath laying on the bed next to Mogen's right side when viewed from the door. In fact, it was Detective Payne who was the first investigator to discover the knife sheath. So we now know who discovered the knife sheath. It wasn't anybody earlier. We know that Detective Payne got there at 4 p.m. Now, why did he get there at 4 p.m.? There's been a lot of controversy, a lot of folks saying, hey, why did it take so long? Well, like I mentioned to you guys before, you had a situation, you got to go into this situation with what they knew at the time, right? Day one, early on, investigators are getting there. What do you have? You have 4 victims. You have 2 in the 3rd floor, 2 in the same bed, and one has more injuries than the other. The one that has more injuries was recently out of a breakup and was with the former boyfriend the night before at the corner club and had called that person multiple times throughout the night. So you have what could be the beginnings of a crime of passion. So that's just the beginning portion of it. Now you have Jack DeCour, who was walking up the street towards the victim's residence once he was notified by his roommates that there was something going on at that house. So he goes on up there and he lets the officers know who he is, and they take him to the station. So now you have somebody who you think could be involved in this case at the station, willing to talk. So as a lead investigator, you're left with 2 options. Are you going to go to the scene and look at the scene, or are you going to go and have an idea of what's going on at the scene? Obviously, there's officers there that are relaying information, but you also have somebody that's willing to talk that could have been associated with this crime, and they're willing to talk without a lawyer. So where are you going to go first? Obviously, you're going to go with the person that you think. That way, you don't go to the scene, give this guy some time to himself, and then all of a sudden he lawyers up, and then you can never talk to him. Right. So you go, you talk to him, you start finding out, we figure that after one day there was the mayor out of Pullman who stated something to the effect that he thought this was a crime of passion. And then the next day, not out of Pullman, I apologize, out of Moscow. And then the next day, the mayor said that, it could have been a burglary. It could have been something else. Well, that mayor had to have gotten some information from somebody. It wasn't just like, oh, yeah, just my mind. Right. No, he talks to the chief of police. Who talks to the investigators. So that was probably well high on the list that this could have been a case of, one of those cases where it was a domestic partnership sort of thing. Right. And so you would have to just kind of conceal or not seal. You'd have to preserve the scene until the lead detective gets there. So the lead detective is going to go talk to Jack DeCour. Now, during their conversation and things of that nature, that's when they discover that, all right, he wasn't involved at all. Right. They were able to exclude him. They were able to exclude him very quickly. And so now he has to get out there and eventually see the scene. And so this is where he gets there. He goes out there. It's preserved until he gets there. Now, we also have to remember how small and tiny this house was. It was a very little home. And I know it was 3 stories and things like that, but the size of the rooms and the size of the square footage of the house wasn't that big. And you're looking at a room, Maddie's room, where the bed covers majority of it. There's a dresser there. There's not a lot of space. And you have 2 victims in one bed. And you're not going to have the entire police department or detective unit or a full team in there trampling over all sorts of evidence. You're going to have probably your ISP, your forensic team going in there. You're probably also going to have, your lead detective. So the lead detective is the one that found this item. Now, from what we understand, it was partially underneath the body of the victim. And who's to say that there wasn't anything else over the body, whether they were covered? It was November. It was a freezing night in Idaho. So I wouldn't be surprised if The first person who was struck, which I suspect that to be Maddie, was under the blankets, and perhaps maybe the sheath may have rolled under there as well throughout the entire commotion, which is probably one of the reasons why you couldn't find it and or why he left it behind. Okay, so that kind of explains that. I mean, I've been saying this for a long time when it comes to that aspect of it, that was really nothing crazy at all. The next thing we figure out is going to be about Dylan's statements, right? And these are going to be about what she said and she saw that night. The defense was trying to basically say something to the effect that, she was drunk. She doesn't remember everything. Not everything she said was accurate. And they attack some of the things that are in the PCA, but what they don't realize is that the PCA isn't everything. Like, you're not supposed to put an entire witness statement in a PCA. It's the bare minimum of information that you need or require to use to make an arrest. Right. The trial is where you put all the information out there, et cetera, et cetera. And so on here, it states that DM had sat for at least 3 interviews with law enforcement, 2 on November 13th. One was with Officer Nunes, later with Detective Maury, and one on November 17th with Detective Gooch. Now, I know for a fact that by the end of the day of November 13th, and I have said this for several days or several months, if not over a year, that the information that DM said came out that day. The mask, the person in the house, the 4 o'clock hearing things, the whole 9 yards, all that information came out day one. I have been saying that since the beginning. And this document also, another thing that I have been saying, proven to be accurate, that in fact was the case, that she did speak about the slender man, taller than her, in a mask, walking through the house during the times of the murders. So it states here that her description of the intruder was notably similar to during all 3 interviews. White male, slim, skinny, lean body type, slightly taller than DM, 5'10", wearing all black, wearing a mask that covered his forehead and mouth. So we also know that before that it was the mouth and the nose, right? And that the eyes and at least the eyebrows were visible. Now we also know that this is also covering his forehead, which would explain why he didn't leave any hair behind throughout this whole ordeal. A voice she didn't recognize saying he was there to help, and the intruder walked towards the black backsliding door without saying anything to her. While she did not tell Officer News that she noticed the intruder carrying a vacuum type object in his hand, she did convey that the information to Detective Maury later that day. Now let's think about this. A vacuum type item in the person's hand. Now I suspect that this person had some sort of kill kit. Is it possible that the handle of the knife or something else was sticking out of that made it appear to have been an attachment for a vacuum? 100%. Could it have been a vacuum on its own? Yeah. I mean, there is a lack of DNA here, isn't there? This would explain why there's a lack of DNA of hair and things of that nature. Was there some sort of attempt to clean up throughout this process? I don't know. She also told Detective Gooch that she remembered the suspect's eyebrows were bushy, but could not remember their color. DM likewise told Detective Maury that she could not remember the color of his eyebrows. More importantly, not only are DM statements consistent with each other with regards to the intruder's description, they were accurately included by law enforcement in the exhibit as set forth above. There is not one statement in the affidavit regarding the intruder that cannot be traced directly to DM's words. Consequently, the defendant was not demonstrated in an intentional or reckless false statement or admission of material exculpatory fact. The defendant also asserts that in Exhibit A watered-down DM statements about hearing Kaylee Goncalves around the time of the homicides. According to the defendant, DM was unequivocally in her 3 interviews. She reported that at approximately 4 a.m., she heard Miss Goncalves walk up the stairs with her dog before running back down the stairs saying someone is here. Now, obviously that wasn't Kaylee, because Kaylee had passed away in the bedroom upstairs. Right now, the dog going up there, that kind of tells us something, right? If the dog is walking up there and police are suspecting that this person that is walking up the stairs is Xana, because she was on TikTok until about 4:12. At 4:12 a.m., I believe that there is a comment on somebody's TikTok referencing one of the pictures that they had taken at that house the night before under the good vibe sign. I believe that's what it was. And it was about 4:12 a.m. And she put a comment there on TikTok, and she had been scrolling on there. Now, if she's going upstairs with the dog, well, the dog had to have gone downstairs at one point, right? And so that tells me that while she was, on her TikTok, the dog walked into the room. She probably went to go take the dog back up to Kaylee's room. Right. And as she's going up there, she hears something that scares her. She says, somebody's here, and she runs down. Now, DM doesn't say that she hears the dog running down the stairs, but we know that the dog is outside because at 4:17, the dog is barking. Now, according to these documents, Payne did a test to determine that the dog was barking outside at 4:17, was not inside of the house. Right. And so if it wasn't from inside the house and it was from outside the house, and at that exact same time you can hear a struggle in Xana's room, well, that tells you that the person didn't go outside with the dog, didn't open the door for the dog. That person went after Xana coming down the stairs, right? Because that's after 4:12, because she was on TikTok at that point. She's going upstairs, running back downstairs. There's a struggle ensuing at 4:17 a.m. And a thud can be heard, and the dog is barking. So what does that say? Well, the only way that dog could have gotten out there is if that back sliding glass door was open. So as I mentioned from the very beginning of this entire investigation, back when Bryan Kohberger got arrested, I mentioned that he went in through the back sliding glass door, that he opened it once and never touched it again. We can determine that that's being true because while he's in the room with Xana, the dog had to have gone out somewhere. That dog had to have gone out the back sliding glass door that was left open and was barking from outside. Like I said, it was left open the entire time. And in my opinion, this is my speculation, I believe that was done 100% because if he would have left DNA, or if he would have touched it multiple times, let's just say he goes in there, he opens the door, then he closes, that's touching it again. Then he's leaving, he has to open it again. Then, that's at least 3 touches, right? Versus just one. And as I mentioned before, you're exerting yourself. You've committed a crime with a knife to four individuals. That's going to cause some perspiration. You're going to exert yourself doing that. You grabbing that door handle or that sliding glass door to get out of there, or you're running fast towards that and you stop to open it. Well, what's going to happen when you stop, right? Sweat's going to continue. You're going to drop sweat. Things like that are going to splash onto the, potentially could splash onto the glass. So you leave it open the entire time. Extreme Blonde says, am I wrong in remembering that Murphy was found shut in Kaylee's room? You're not wrong. I thought that was the case too. It really didn't specify, but from what I remember was that there was a body cam footage, I believe, of Officer Nunez that stated that when he went into Kaylee's room, that there was a dog in the room. I don't know if they specified him actually opening the door to get into the room. You know what I mean? So if he didn't, then the dog was in there. No, I understand. Now, like I said, I had an incident myself where a dog bit me in the arm in my house, and it was one of my dogs that got into it, and one of my dogs bit me when I was trying to break him up. It terrified my other dogs because my dog got an artery and it sprayed everywhere. And well, anyways, my other dogs got terrified. They ran to their crates where they sleep at night. And they were in there with the crate door open for multiple hours, even after I left to the hospital. I ended up being hospitalized for a few days, given the severity of the injury to my arm. And from what my wife told me it was about approximately maybe about 6-7 hours before they started to leave that area. And it was just in a moment, in a flash, and they saw and what had occurred. So, Murphy, I think he was a younger dog at the time. For him to run upstairs in fear to go to the place that he knows where he's normally supposed to be at, which is in Kaylee's room, I don't see how that's something that is says that Bryan Kohberger didn't commit this crime. It's weird. All right, so let's continue this. The statements challenged by the defendant can be read in 2 ways. The DM said, I think, okay, so basically the defense was saying that in in Dylan's statement, she stated that she heard Kaylee Goncalves run down the stairs with the dog. However, in the affidavit, they put thought, right? That she thought that she heard Kaylee. Now, the defense is trying to say or imply that that Dylan said that she thought, and that's not the case. What they are implying is that they have evidence to believe it was somebody else who was running down there, and that other person being Xana. All right, let's continue this. And so they look at a couple of other statements from Dylan that she had made to try to say that her statements aren't reliable. But again, I don't know how any of her statements are exculpatory towards Bryan Kohberger or actually inculpatory or against Bryan Kohberger. So, like, for instance, what is that she is saying that this was Bryan Kohberger. Her saying she saw a guy in a dark mask that she could not identify in a photo lineup. That doesn't say Bryan Kohberger. You know what I mean? Her saying that the noises that she heard, or if it was Kaylee or if it was Xana running up and down the stairs, how is that going to say that Kohberger is innocent? It doesn't. These things are maybe perhaps inconsistent with what the evidence says, but you also have to understand that the person was intoxicated. She speaks about it. Says here that defendant's next assertions that the probable cause statement omitted important information bearing on DM's reliability. DM qualified her interview statements on several occasions by questioning her memory of the event. For example, she told Detective Mari everything was kind of blurry, like I didn't fully remember it. I would say, and then a few days later, while recounting the events of Detective Gooch, DM stated, again, I believe I was also very drunk. I don't know how much of this is real. Like, I don't know if my mind was like doing whatever. I don't know if any of it, like half of this stuff, I don't know if it's a dream or if it's real. I just have no clue. Now, the other thing is, too, we don't know what questions were asked during the specific answer, right? Like, that looks kind of like, whoa, wow, that's weird, right? But what if the question was, why did you wait 8 hours to call 911? I was very drunk. I didn't know how much of it was real. I didn't know if my mind was like doing whatever. I don't know if any of it, like half of this stuff, I don't know if it was a dream or real. I had just had no clue. Now, doesn't that make a little bit more sense when you talk about, hey, why did you wait 8 hours to call 911? And so this is a cherry-picked statement that could have been about a number of things. She also stated that her memory was fuzzy and cloudy, and she could not differentiate if anything was real or if anything was a dream. I do think that that could create some issues for some of the things that they're saying. But again, for the prosecution, but again, none of it says Bryan Kohberger. None of it says not Bryan Kohberger. It's just aligning with what the evidence that they have, right? They say that she sees this person leaving, and shortly afterwards, they see the white Elantra on camera at the 1112 from the 1112 King Road residence, the next door neighbor that is pointing to the King Queen Road intersection, leave at a high rate of speed at 4:20 a.m. We have the Linda Lane footage that shows that vehicle pulled in at 4:04 a.m., probably parked somewhere around 4:07. So a lot of people are saying 7 minutes, 5 minutes, this or that. 4:07 parking and leaving at 4:20 is not 11. That's what, 13 minutes. That's 13 minutes. Take 3 minutes or 2 minutes to walk up to the room or walk up to the house, walk out of the house, back to the car, to switch out a jumpsuit. 2 to 3 minutes. It shouldn't take that long to walk 20 feet, put on a jumpsuit, walk 20 feet and take off a jumpsuit, right? Because that's about what the distance is that he allegedly parked outside of the house, walked to the residence. Some people suspect that he changed into a jumpsuit. Maybe he already had it on, but at one point the suspicion is that he changed out of said jumpsuit that he was wearing while inside of the house committing the murders, and put that into some sort of bag before entering his vehicle. Those things don't take very long. Now, I know that there's some folks that are going to say, well, that's still pretty quick. 11 minutes, 12 minutes to go in there and commit a crime like this is fairly fast. Well, there was a guy in Australia not too long ago. I think it was like sometime last year. He ended up taking the lives of, oh gosh, I think it was like 6 people. He ended up utilizing a knife, and he injured 19 or 18 people in the matter of like 18 minutes. And 15 minutes of that was running from police. This was in a 3-story airport, I believe. And none of his victims were asleep and intoxicated at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. You know what I mean? So these were all alert people, and he was able to still take the lives of 6 and injure an additional 10 within less time frame, if you take out the fact that he was running away from law enforcement throughout that process as well. So you have all of that. And I mean, it just takes mere seconds to do some of these things. I've often told everybody, is like, hey, if you were to walk from your front yard, and now that's if you live in a conventional place. Now, obviously, if you're like a ranch somewhere and there's like an acre between your front yard, your front door, and your front fence, then that's probably going to be not the point. But this is a college rental place with a lot of buildings in that area, very tight, compact. I believe, well, the house was facing Queen. It was King Road, but it was facing Queen Road. And so it was actually, I think, like a couple of buildings on the same plot of land, so to speak. I don't know, but there was a lot of buildings closely together. So if you were to walk outside from the street to the back of your house, I mean, just walk through your front yard all the way to the back of your house. To me, I mean, I have a larger home, in my opinion. I got a decent sized yard. It would take me less than a minute to do so. Less than a minute just to walk from the street through my front door and, out of my back door, probably 45 seconds. And if I wanted to do it quickly, probably less than 11. If I wanted to run through it, it's not 100 yards. It's not anything like that. Bryan Kohberger was able to run a mile in 6 minutes. And that was on his little app that he was using when he was running in that area. And it was a recent run that he had done in Pullman that tracked him at a 6-minute mile. And so he was in there for enough time to run 2 miles. And you guys think that was not enough time for him to commit this crime? I don't know, man. I don't know. Let's see. The other evidence included in Exhibit A corroborated her account. For example, the security camera from 1112 King Road picked up audio from a struggle at 4:17 a.m., which coincides with DM stating she thought was crying from Miss Kernodle's room and a male voice speaking. It was shortly after this she opened the door and the third time and saw the suspect walk by her toward the sliding glass door, which corresponds with the surveillance video showing the suspect vehicle leaving 1112 King Road residence at 4:20 a.m. Now, this is more of a direct amount. This isn't an approximation. This is a direct time at 4:20. In addition, law enforcement corroborated DM's description of the defendant through his vehicle's identification efforts, which led to investigators to the defendant's driver's license information. The exhibit, as note, the defendant's physical description was consistent with DM's account. All right. Let's see. The defendant has shown no objective indication that DM's interview statements were unreliable, particularly given the other corroborating evidence. So that's kind of like what I've been saying for a bit. There's a lot of corroborating evidence here that is specifying what she is saying. Patrick Leary coming in with his membership for 8 months on YouTube saying it's a bird, it's a plane, no wait, it's big blue. And Dave Bautista, to set the record straight, flying on the backs of their drunk turkey. You know it. Steph C says he went there to take Maddie to another location, but those plans were failed and he panicked. I mean, that's quite possible. I think that's some of the things that a lot of people have thought of, that, is it possible that he was just trying to remove somebody from the house? Maddie is one of the persons that I think a lot of people think is most likely this, the target, given the fact that her bedroom is closest to the street and to the back parking area, where if somebody wanted to look into the house, that would be one of the bedrooms that was easier to see into and to identify where that was at. Bryan Kohberger did go in through the back sliding glass door and straight up to the front, to the third floor. So it did seem like he was going to a direct spot. I would assume that was the case as well. Let's see. So defendants DM did not, or was not able to identify Bryan Kohberger through a lineup. So here in this state, this kind of tells us a little bit about what Bryan Kohberger may have been wearing. This is the defendant also contends that law enforcement's failure to include DM's non-recognition of the defendant exhibit A's warrant Frank's hearing during her December 30th, 2022 interview with law enforcement. So on December 30th, law enforcement brought her in, showed her a lineup, and she was not able to determine who Bryan Kohberger was. Her statement was, "I have no clue. From what I remember, I just remember seeing a figure that was more like the skinnier toned build and some mask on. I don't know if it was covering his mouth, his nose, or below his mouth and his nose. I just remember he was white, but I didn't know how he was white. I just knew he was, and I knew he looked at me because of his bushy eyebrows. Well, I'm assuming you probably saw the color around his eyes as well. However, the fact that DM could not identify the defendant is hardly exculpatory or material to the probable cause. Her interview statements consistent described a black-clad masked person who was with someone she thought who was not someone she thought she knew or could identify. Her inability to recognize the defendant's unmasked is expected, particularly where there is a description as related in the Exhibit A as described, a mask that covered the person's mouth and nose. So, how you expect to, recognize somebody while they're wearing a mask at night while you're intoxicated, that's a little bit high of an expectation there. Does not mean that it was not Bryan Kohberger. All right, let's see. Vehicle identification. So this is when they decided that the vehicle was a 2014 or a 2015 Elantra. Initially, they put out their 2011 to 13, and this is when we find out some information here. Defendant claims there are two material exculpatory omissions in this paragraph. First, he asserts that law enforcement should have disclosed the FBI's vehicle specialist felt more comfortable with the 2011-2013 date range of the suspect vehicle. Second, he asserts that the specialist's opinion expanding the date range was predicted on erroneous use of video taken from Ridge Road, which law enforcement knew or should have known was not the suspect vehicle. Defendant also faults the officers for failing to provide magistrate with the footage reviewed by the specialist, which according to the defendant would have demonstrated the magistrate that a vehicle identification could not have been reasonably made. The defendants claim that the FBI vehicle specialist felt more comfortable setting the year range of 2011 to 2013, and law enforcement knew their specialist was of the opinion of the car was also certainly between 11 and 13 is based on an email chain between a specialist, Agent Anthony Email, and another FBI agent about their investigation. However, the email chain does not support this argument. What the email chain shows that on November 26th, so remember when I told you guys, and I've been saying this for a while, that when Moscow Police Department got Bryan Kohberger's name was December 19th. I have been saying this for years. December 19th, 2022 is when Bryan Kohberger's name was first spoken of with Moscow Police Department as a potential suspect. I said that I think if anybody can go back and find it, I think it was in Truth and Transparency's one of the shows that I did with her. I think I was on her channel when she asked me specifically, when do you think it was? And I said, December 19th. I got laughed at, got pointed and laughed and said, oh, no, the PCA says November 25th. You're wrong. You don't know what you're talking about, blah, 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 blah. Here in a little bit, I'm going to show you guys where I was exactly right on December 19th. But as I said it before, it was December 19th. This says here that in an email chain that was on November 26th, an agent email directed the FBI to open up their search to a 2011 to 2016. So this was before that they had Bryan Kohberger's name in their, target area. This is before he became a suspect. This is November 26th. Now I know December 7th, they put out the 11 to 13. And, a couple of reasons why I think they did that. One, just to kind of be generic, it's like an approximation. I think they even put a picture up there with one of them had a sunroof, one of them didn't. And these were stock photos, not photos of the car, before anybody goes all crazy. And so to me, I just kind of told me that at the time that information was available, they did not have the clearest footage of the vehicle. And sure enough, that seems to be the case. But from the beginning, they thought that there was the possibility that it was a 20 to open it up to 2016. He stated that he wanted to get a better picture of the fog lights on the front and the back to determine if it was a 2014 to 16. Let's see. Defendant has not shown the omission of exculpatory material. Let me see. Because of the preference. But yeah, so they opened it up beforehand. Defendant next challenges Exhibit A on the grounds of the FBI vehicle specialist identification of suspect vehicle 1 was based on video footage from Ridge Road that law enforcement knew or should have known that suspect vehicle 1. The defendant states knows that law enforcement, based on its identification of the Ridge Road footage, because we have the emails from FBI specialist who explains November 23rd, 2022, that their team is mainly looking at the window configuration, something these other images do not. But later that day, an FBI agent sends them images from this video, calling it a great one. However, the defendant's proffer does not show the FBI specialist identification was in fact made on Ridge Road footage. The FBI emails defendant contends to support the position contain no mention of Ridge Road footage and no mention that the FBI was mainly looking at a window configuration. The defendant asserts that the email stating got a great one attached to these images from the Ridge Road footage, but there's nothing in the proffer establishing that images were in fact attached. And importantly, that those images were at Bates 15582 at the pre-Franks hearing. The court inquired further into defendant's support for his positions that the identification of suspect vehicle 1 is based on the Ridge Road footage. Counsel again referred to the FBI emails and unlabeled screenshots reproduced on page 17 of the defendant's amended memorandum. The defendant claims were from Ridge Road footage. This is insufficient to establish beyond speculation the Ridge Road footage was the basis for the identification. Even assuming it were, however, the defendant still failed to carry his burden under the Franks because the vehicle identification came from the FBI, which was disclosed to the magistrate in his Exhibit A. There is a presumption of reliability. Okay. Basically, I think what they also said there is that there is also no evidence that says that the vehicle on Ridge Road was not suspect vehicle 1. It says right here, there is no evidence. Assuming the Ridge Road footage was in fact not suspect vehicle 1, the defendant was not part of the FBI chain, which alleged the evidence of the Ridge Road makes the identification further. But yeah, they also agree, they also say in here, so I've read this like 4 times, that that they believe that the vehicle on Ridge Road was in fact his. Okay, misleading timeline. All right, so here they're saying here that that they misled, law enforcement misled, I guess, everybody when saying that Bryan Kohberger's phone turned off at 2:47 when in fact it turned off at 2:54, which is about 7 minutes later. And that at that time it was in fact still traveling southbound. And when it turned off, they were able to determine that he could still get back to where the victim's residence was well within the time. He had turned his phone off over an hour, almost 2 hours. Actually, I think it was like at 2:50. Murders occurred at 4, so about an hour and like 10-15 minutes when he turned off his phone before the murders. The drive from Pullman to Moscow is like 10 minutes. There's a number of ways he could have gone around there. It says that he was heading southbound. I actually have a drive that I have documented that we looked up on Google Earth. I don't have it here with me. We'll probably pull it up again maybe this week, maybe a little bit later. I can pull it up. Those on TikTok are going to have to go and look at the. You're going to have to go and look at the on the YouTube side to check it out. But I have a Google map that shows where you can go south of Pullman through. I think it was the first town you make a left. You end up back through the same path that he would have taken when he left out of there to avoid traffic cameras. Let's see. They talk about the front license plate missing, and they do mention that there is a camera that shows that the front license plate is missing in Moscow. So they are able to determine that was the one that the A&W security camera. Okay, the defendant has not met his burden on the dog. So here's the dog barking aspect. This is the part that we were talking about earlier. Kind of jump forward a little bit talking about this aspect of it, but here's where it's at. It states that at 4:17 a.m., a security camera located in nearby residence on King Road picked up a distorted audio of what sounded like voices or a whimper followed by a loud thud. A dog can also be heard barking numerous times starting at 4:17 a.m. The only other information in Payne Exhibit A pertaining to the dog refers to the fact that Kaylee's dog, Murphy, was found in her bedroom by first responders The defendant contends that Detective Payne failed to include 3 allegedly important pieces of information pertaining to the dog. The dog heard the dog heard on the security camera continued to bark for 30 minutes after the suspect left, and that Payne conducted a test to determine that the dog was likely outside while barking, and that Murphy was found without any blood on him, even though the bedroom doors were open where the descendants were found. According to the defendant, this omitted information that would have revealed whoever was in the house brought the dog back inside after the suspect vehicle left. He further argues the information is material exculpatory because it undermines the narrative and timeline that supports the probable cause. However, the defendant's argument assumes without proof that there were no doors left open in the home after the suspect left. This assumption is not only speculative but contrary to the evidence, and is proffered that the sliding glass door to the residence, the same door towards which DM reportedly saw the suspect walk, was left open. Thus, if the dog heard barking was in fact Murphy, it could have well came back inside through the open door and gone into Miss Goncalves' room from his own, where he eventually remained. There is simply no evidence to adopt the defendant's speculation that someone brought Murphy inside after the suspect left the residence. Consequently, the defendant has not shown that the failure of law enforcement to speculate was material and exculpatory omission that was intentional or reckless excluded. Okay. So I'm not even like, oh, and on here as well, it says here, number 29 says, this is the same security camera that shows a suspect vehicle departing from the area at 1122 King Road at 4:20 a.m. So this is the 1112 King Road residence. This is the one that has that camera, light bulb camera that is capturing all these noises and everything else that's here. Now, here's the other thing about that Linda Lane footage. If, you know, this dog's supposed to be barking for about 30 minutes after the murders, and it's supposed to be outside during this time. I don't hear a dog barking for that amount of time. I'll be honest. I just don't. You know, maybe I'll go back and listen to it. We'll make a show out of it. We'll see if we can hear the dog barking throughout the entire time. But I personally don't. And if I don't hear the dog barking throughout that entire time and it's outside and it's barking, I doubt some of the other noises that are there are from the victim's residence. I think it's just too far away. It's a football field away, and in between there is a huge apartment complex that is housing multiple hundreds of students in there. I think it's like a two floors at the very minimum. I think it's 3 different buildings, apartments facing both sides of each building. And so it's a significant apartment complex where those noises could have came from. Plus, you also have to remember that if this camera was sensitive enough to pick up sounds 100 yards away, you know, to the 100 yards to the west, then I would have thought it'd probably pick up sounds 100 yards north, south, and east. And so those noises could have been from a huge radius, so to speak, especially if it's faint noises. You know what I'm saying? It's not like it's something that you can hear that's relatively close. So you have to kind of put it out there pretty far. All right. Let me see if there's anything else I have on this one. Yeah, we talked about this. Let's see. Payne makes a false statement in his affidavit. Payne states in the affidavit that approximately 2:47, Kohberger's phone stops reporting to the network. The 2:47 a.m. traffic is continuous 7-minute stream of multiple towers that ends at 2:54 a.m. Payne does not document the 7 minutes traffic. Payne did not inform the magistrate about these handoffs, which would have clearly and directly shown him the fact that on November 13th at 2:47 to 2:54, Mr. Kohberger's device was not heading to Moscow, as purported by Payne, but was indeed heading southbound from Pullman. The fact that Payne neither disregarded or was not aware of the handoff's direct travel Mr. Kohberger's device gives. So that's what it is. That's what it is. So remember when Cy said that there was some stuff that was missing and that there was like either they didn't do it or there was they weren't aware of what they did. Well, this is what they were talking about. They were talking about that 7 minutes, in fact, where he's heading southbound through Pullman and south out of Pullman. But what they don't understand, or what they're trying to say that is exculpatory, isn't, because this is at 2:54. He is seen at was it 3:27 a.m. at the Indian 700 block of Indian Hills, right behind the Moscow Police Department. That's the first time he's seen on camera. mean, that's 40 minutes away, and you're looking at about 10 to 15 mile difference, or 10 to 15 miles of a drive. It's not that far. And so to think that, all right, hey, he was facing this direction when his phone turned off, it doesn't mean that he didn't stop and turn the other way. In fact, we know he had to have gone eastbound, because when his phone comes back to the network, he's south of Moscow. He's not westbound. He's not at the Walleye Park. He's not, coming from that direction back. He's traveling south of Moscow. Two different things, right? It'd be one thing if when his phone turns off, he's traveling east from Walleye or from the coast or something. But that's not the case. He's coming back the other way. In fact, I think defendants, other cellular expert, Cy Ray, likewise contends that he has reviewed multiple search warrant affidavits prepared by Detective Payne, and his statement that the defendant's cell phone stopped reporting to the network at 2:47 is blatantly false and not supported by the AT&T data. So that's all he's going to say. He's not going to say that, he's going to say that his phone didn't turn off at 2:47 and he continued south, not towards Moscow. Whoopity-doo. Whoopity-doo. Like, who cares? You can easily turn your phone freaking back on at 3 o'clock and travel 15 minutes. I mean, there's more time there. He must have done something else in between that time, because that's too much time for him to still get there. You get what I'm saying? Let's see. All right. Finally, the defendant has not shown that Detective Payne mistakenly in identifying the handoff data to be exculpatory. Mr. Solonsky claims that it was exculpatory because a correct interpretation of the data would have showed the device was not heading to Moscow as purported by Payne, but was indeed headed southbound from Pullman. There are two problems with this assertion. First, the pen register affidavit represents that the device was traveling south at 2:47 a.m. when, according to Detective Payne, that it was last reported to it. Let's see. Second, even if the pen register affidavit did misrepresent the defendant's cell phone was headed to Moscow at 2:47 and at 2:54 a.m. as opposed to southbound from Pullman, a correction could have no effect on the probable cause. Traveling southbound from Pullman at 2:54 more than an hour prior to the homicides does not disprove the defendant could have driven to Moscow after 2:54 and his phone stopped reporting to the network. As the affidavit points out, footage from multiple videos obtained from the neighborhood around the 1122 King Road showed several sightings of a vehicle matching the description of the defendant's vehicle, starting at 3:29 a.m. and ending at 4:20 a.m. Given the proximity of the Pullman to Moscow, the fact that the defendant may have been traveling southbound at Pullman in 2:45 a.m. does not exclude him as a potential driver of the suspect vehicle from the probable cause standpoint. Moreover, the strength of the other evidence described in the pen register affidavit cannot be overlooked. The affidavit describes how the CSLI data showed that the defendant's cell phone left his apartment at approximately 2:45 a.m. and started traveling southbound before ceasing reporting to the network, approximately 90 minutes before the homicides occurred. The phone then started reporting to the network again approximately 90 minutes later, and not after the homicides occur, which at that time was traveling south on Highway 95 south of Moscow, before looping back north into Pullman via Highway 195, consistent with the CSLI surveillance camera from the Pullman area showed while the Hyundai Elantra consistent with the defendant's vehicle returning from the area of the defendant's apartment at 5:25 a.m. In addition, the affidavit described the footage from multiple surveillance videos that captured the vehicle consistent with the defendant's make 3 passes by the 1122 King Road between 3:29 and 4:20, at which time it departed from the residence at a high rate of speed. On one surveillance camera, according to Detective Payne, the suspect vehicle did not appear to have front license plate. He noted the defendant's vehicle had been registered to Pennsylvania at the time of the homicides, which does not require a license plate to be displayed. Finally, CSLI evidence shows that approximately 9 a.m., this is a good one, this is a really good one, on November 13, 2022, a mere 3.5 hours after the defendant's return to his apartment, he again left his apartment and returned to Moscow, utilizing the cellular services resources that provided coverage for 1122 King Road residents between approximately 9:12 and 9:21 a.m. before traveling back to his apartment at 9:32 a.m. This is consistent with the defendant returning to the scene of the crime, not just to the area, but to the scene of the crime. This is in black and white, red right here, red all over, returning to the scene of the crime. That's exactly what they said. Now, I know that the other times that he was there, the other 12 times, they put out there, hey, he went, but he may not have been in close proximity to the house. May have gone for other reasons to Moscow. On this day on this morning of the crime, he returned back to the scene. He was there at the scene again. So you mean murders happen middle of the night, right? Let's put this all in perspective. We'll start off with, what are the chances that Bryan Kohberger decides to go out at the same time that somebody's going to commit a mass homicide? 4 murders in one night. I mean, the likelihood of that happening in Moscow is probably slim, right? And so the fact that that's slim on its own, plus you add the fact that this person's going to be out there at the exact same time by himself. And then, so how do those probability or chances increase or decrease the probability of Bryan Kohberger? And once we find out that the person that committed this crime is also driving a vehicle matching the make and model of Bryan Kohberger's vehicle, down to the front license plate and being missed or missing. All right. And then we also have to factor in the fact that, what are the chances? Do those increase or decrease? Or how do they increase or decrease when we find out that the person that was also out and about during the same time that Bryan Kohberger is, that Bryan Kohberger is going to turn his phone off specifically during the time that the murders happen? Because his phone turns off just for a period of time. What are the chances that during that time frame is when these murders are going to occur? And then, do those chances increase or decrease when we find out that the person that committed this crime also had Bryan Kohberger's DNA on their person? Because it was on the knife sheet. The knife sheet was brought in by the killer, so they had Bryan Kohberger's DNA. And then we have to factor in also now that, what are the chances are that the place that Bryan Kohberger returns to the next morning for approximately 9 minutes is the victim's house that he has no connection to? I think that you'd probably, what was it, like 5.3 octillion to 1 match that the DNA sheet, the DNA on the sheath matched to Bryan Kohberger would be somebody else's. I think that's a better chance than all of those things that I just mentioned happening at the same time. Just speaking truth. Detective Payne also noted that the defendant's height, weight, and ethnicity were consistent with DM's description of the perpetrator, which he informed the magistrate the defendant was a PhD student in criminology at Washington State University and studied how technological data used by law enforcement, the interference drawn from this information. The defendant knew particularly from technological perspective how to cover his tracks. All right, let's see. I'm almost done with this first one. Let's see. Okay. We did find out that there was only one footprint, which it's kind of weird. I'm not going to lie. That there's only one latent footprint there. I don't understand it, and I'm not going to. How can I put this? I don't understand how there's just one latent footprint there. Now, I don't know if they were able to determine if this was from that night or not, or what. I'm not sure, but it does appear that there was just one latent print there, and that it was in an awkward position. Maybe it didn't have anything to do with this case at all. But even if it doesn't, let's just say we throw out that one latent footprint. What does that have to do with Bryan Kohberger not being in that house? I mean, how does that say that's somebody else? You know what I mean? It just doesn't make any sense. Just kind of want to scroll through this real quick. They talk about the IGG here, which we're going to go over in a little bit more. And I guess the biggest point about this is the fact that the FBI did, in fact, and we got through there, the FBI did, in fact, use 2 websites, I guess, that they weren't supposed to. But again, this isn't a violation of law. This is a violation of, this is like a civil matter. So if I go into somewhere and say, hey, I'm going to sign up, we'll use this example. I'm going to submit my DNA to GEDmatch or whatever it was, or the other one. And they use my DNA to find somebody. That other person isn't the victim. The person that they found, the killer, the murderer, whatever, they're not the victim. I'm the victim. You violated my rights. You get what I'm saying? my rights were violated. I said I didn't want my DNA to be looked into evidence. I have a right to sue GEDmatch Ancestry or whoever it was that violated my rights. That doesn't mean that they go to jail. That doesn't mean that they broke the law. They broke policy. There's a difference between policy and law. So, all right, let's move on to the next one. This one is the order on the defendant's motions to suppress arrest warrants, the apartment and person. Hold on one second. I need to drag something here real quick on the TikTok to make sure that it's me. And I'm back. All righty. So let's see what we have here. On December 29th, a criminal complaint and probable cause order were filed in action of Latall Magistrate issued for a warrant for defendant's arrest. Okay. All right. So we know that they got a warrant for Bryan Kohberger's parents' house at 119 Lambsden Drive for the defendant's person and the defendant's vehicle, which was believed to be parked in the garage. The search warrants were supported by an affidavit of probable cause. All right, so we're going to learn a few things about what happened when Bryan Kohberger was arrested here. So there was Detective Payne's understanding that the PSP and SRT, which is the like the SWAT team that we're going to be, oh man, what's the word I'm looking for? They're going to be taking care of the warrant, issuing the warrant. That they were going to be preparing for a knock and announce entry. During the final preparation, certain snipers set an umbrella around the residence to monitor any activity therein, while the helicopter monitored from overhead in the event that the defendant exited the residence. So they had a helicopter in the area as well. I wonder if Bryan Kohberger heard all these things because he was awake and alert during this time. At 12:33 a.m., snipers observed a kitchen light turn on and saw a taller young white male wearing a black hoodie standing near a glass sliding door leading out to the deck. And at 12:40 a.m., the same person was seen again. This time, officers were able to positively identify the person as the defendant. At 12:55 a.m., the light turned on in the garage where the defendant's vehicle was believed to be parked. At 1:03 a.m., the lights flashed in the garage as if the vehicle was being locked and or unlocked by a key fob. At 1:09 a.m., the defendant is seen in the kitchen of the home, this time wearing rubber gloves and handling a plastic baggie. Based on the observations, law enforcement believed the defendant was potentially destroying evidence from the vehicle that was related to the homicides. Law enforcement was also aware the defendant possessed a Glock handgun and promoting concern over the officer's safety due to the defendant's heightened mental state of awareness or threat level, the possibility of tracking him. Thus, law enforcement made the decision to shorten the knock and announce when executing the warrant. So they had accident. I can't pronounce that word. They had circumstances that allowed them to enter the building without having to knock. And, those exigent circumstances can be sometimes like the safety of somebody in this situation here, destroying evidence, and they already have a warrant to enter. So at approximately 1:14, CERT made an announcement from a Bearcat parked in the driveway of the residence. Immediately following the announcement, CERT effectuated and forced entry into the residence. Defendant was arrested without incident in a bedroom. His vehicle was located and secured in the garage. Once apprehended, defendant was handcuffed and placed in a police vehicle. He was notified that he was in a police vehicle and being audio and video recorded, which he acknowledged. While awaiting transport, defendant informed law enforcement that he had an unloaded Glock 22 handgun in the residence by his bed. During transport, the defendant engaged in small talk with the company officers. When the defendant expressed at one point that he wanted to know what was going on with his arrest, law enforcement officers told him investigators were going to speak to him at the station about the situation. The details of the investigation were not discussed with the defendant. Once they arrived at the station, the defendant was escorted into the processing room to await interview with Detective Payne, which occurred 10 minutes later. Defendant was then informed of his Miranda rights, and an interview subsequently began. So they did give him there was some sort of interview or interrogation that was done. Let's see. And they go in there about all this knock and, a bunch of stuff that they should have knocked and this and that. And really nothing that is any new information as to pertaining to the actual case. All righty. So defendant next argues any statements he made to law enforcement prior to being Mirandized must be suppressed either as fruits of the poisonous tree or as Miranda violation, having determined the execution of the warrants at the 1119 line was valid. The question is whether there was a Miranda violation. The court finds that there was not. So they didn't actually ask him anything. Let's see. Go back up here. There are two infirmities of the defendant argument. However, first, he entirely ignores the destruction of evidence existency, which is what law enforcement relied on greatly dispense while the knock and the announcement requirement here. The evidence demonstrates that while preparing to execute the warrants, law enforcement identified the defendant early in the morning hours and as he turned on the lights in the kitchen and then proceeded into the garbage where his vehicle was believed to be parked, the garage where his vehicle was believed to be parked. Law enforcement was aware that the defendant was suspected of having driven that vehicle during the commission of the homicides and knew that it could contain evidence. Law enforcement then saw the vehicle's lights flashing in the garage as if the vehicle was being unlocked or locked. Immediately afterwards, they saw the defendant again in the kitchen wearing rubber gloves, handling plastic baggies. Further, it was 1:09 in the morning at the time when most people would not be removing items from their car with rubber gloves. These observations give the rise to reasonable belief that perhaps aware of law enforcement surveillance, the defendant was destroying or secreting evidence of the crimes. Second component concern is the potential destruction of evidence, that there's an equally compelling concern the knock and announce could possess serious danger to law enforcement, etc. Okay, so we're done with that one. That was a fairly quick one, and this is probably gonna be the last one we do. This one's gonna be the hearing that was the transcript that was just here undone. So this is at 1 hour, 1 minute. I got to write that down. Okay. All right. So the first person that was brought up was Detective Corporal Payne, and this was the I guess quote unquote Frank's hearing in the IGG. This is the transcript that they had. This is the redacted transcript for the hearing they had on the 23rd that was closed to everybody else. So this is Detective Payne, and initially the first couple of questions are going to be about the same, like, where do you work? How long have you worked? Your experience, yada, yada, yada. So let's get to the part where it's good. When was the first time that you heard Bryan Kohberger's name? Now, remember, guys, I told you guys, when was that day? Let's all say it all together at the same time, December 19, 2022. I told everybody that was the first time that they heard Bryan Kohberger's name, and I said this years ago. When was the first time that you heard Bryan Kohberger's name? Answer from Detective Payne. The first time I heard Bryan Kohberger's name was December 19, 2022. And what was that a result of? That was a result of the investigative genetic genealogy that was being undertaken by the FBI. We had a phone call that evening, and we were told Bryan Kohberger's name. And before that, Mr. Kohberger was not on your radar? No, ma'am. Before December 19th, was the FBI cast team member collected with you? Yes, ma'am. All right. So that was the day, December 19th. I've said it so many times. I couldn't say it anymore. So many people said, no, you're wrong. This is false. This is another thing that I said was wrong and false. And here we are. All right. So let's go a little bit further. By the time it was December 19th and you'd first heard of Bryan Kohberger's name, had you reviewed the videotapes? Yes, ma'am. How many hours of videotapes do you think you reviewed? I don't remember a lot. I can't give you an accurate representation. In those videotapes, did you focus in on particular ones that were interest of you? Yes, ma'am. Particularly would be the ones that you're talking about. Address that were, how would you like me to refer to them? How you nicknamed the camera. So the first one was from the 1112 King Road. It was a surveillance camera of an exterior surveillance camera of the house that was immediately to the northeast of the 1122 King Road. There was some footage from Linda Lane camera. I forgot the address off the top of my head. There was footage from an A&W, and then there was which was at the corner of Louder and South Main, or Highway 95. There was footage from an address on Indian Hills, and there was also footage from Ridge Road camera. And that's how we referred to them basically with those names. And they go in back and forth. Do you think they were important? How much were they important? And she kind of goes back and forth a little bit. Like, I'll be honest with you, when I was reading this, it seems like she was kind of all over the place. Okay. She goes, I'm going to return to those in a minute. And this is about the cameras, but I want to talk to you about interviews. Did you interview people in relation to the case before September 19th? Yes, ma'am. And did other officers interview people? Yes, ma'am. Were some of those people the roommates of the people at 1122 King? Yes, ma'am. Did you review other officers' work as well? Yes, ma'am. Did you have a regular meetings with other officers about the status of the investigation? Yes, ma'am. Did you have any role in deciding to pursue investigative genealogy? Yes, ma'am. It was a cooperative decision amongst command team to get that route, but yes, I was a part of that. Were you part of the decisions during the process of identification? Yes. Were you aware that Othram Laboratories began to work the investigative genealogy? Yes. What kind of information did you receive from Othram? I don't remember. It was received from Othram directly. I knew that they were conducting their specific type of work. I don't remember exactly what they provided to us. Did you receive some documents from them? Yes, ma'am. Do you know how many documents received? I do not. Was it one time or more than one time? I don't remember. Were you part of the discussion to take the work from Othram to go to the FBI? Yes. Why was that decision made? From my understanding, granted, this is my first encounter with IGG. So again, as a collaborative decision, we decided that because the Idaho State Police Lab and Othram had essentially exhausted their resources, so they had done everything and had no name. Remember, that was part of the FBI policy, that they had to exhaust all their resources. This is how I understood it, that we could move to the FBI because they had more resources available to pursue this particular avenue. They asked about what resource, and he said the only on preview was that they had more database that they could compare the sample to. That was the extent of my knowledge. All right, so now they're talking about the tip, right? So it goes, the only thing that was given to us was Bryan Kohberger's name, and that was it. It was conveyed to us by the FBI, and that it was to be taken no more than a tip. That was it. So once we received his name, we set about doing basically an independent verification of whether or not he was involved in this crime. So basically, like I told you guys from the beginning, once you get somebody's name, that doesn't mean you can go arrest them. It's not what you know, it's what you can prove. You got to build a case. And getting information that is not admissible in trial means you gotta get creative about building your case, and which they did. I'm going to talk to you about the little bit more. So this is where she goes. Ann Taylor says, I'm going to talk to you about that a little bit more, but do you know why the FBI connected Bryan Kohberger to this case? The answer goes, so December 20th, if memory serves, we had a secondary meeting with the FBI via Teams. They simply walked us through the family tree, how they did that. Now, I don't remember the details of all that. It was an in-depth conversation that, to be honest, is above my head, but they essentially worked their way through the family tree and arrived at a conclusion that Bryan Kohberger was a person we should look into as a tip. That's the extent of my knowledge of how they did that. How was Bryan Kohberger, the name received as a tip, linked in the case? He wasn't until after December 19th. All right. Why did you become interested in learning the identity of Bryan Kohberger? We were interested in anyone who would have been involved in this. The DNA from the knife sheath was obviously the one thing that we had that we thought was a very strong piece of evidence in this case. So that was a particular piece that we pursued as a potential avenue of identifying the suspect. It is my understanding that the FBI concluded that Bryan Kohberger was a possible source of the DNA that we should look into. They did not, to my knowledge, at any point say Bryan Kohberger's DNA is on the knife sheath. That is what makes it inadmissible in court, is because the IGG folks don't test the DNA and test it towards the suspect for a one-on-one comparison. They just say, hey, it could be this guy. Based on, this person's relatives, we think it's him. Can't tell you it's him for sure. Can't use this against him because we can't tell you that for a fact. So you're going to have to figure it out and detect and figure out how to come up with a probable cause to arrest him. On December 20th, when that happened, when he's somebody you should look into, what did you do? He said, we had already started looking into him from the previous evening. So that day, December 20th, we began going through basically our sort of standard of investigative procedures that we had been doing throughout the investigation for various leads, to include basic DMV searches, NCIC offline returns, NCIC searches. We have a database called the TLO, which is a credit-based search that we used to find basic information. We started doing all those things, looking for information on Mr. Kohberger. Question, and what you found is that he didn't have a criminal history. Is that correct? He said that is correct. And then she goes, talk to me about going to Pennsylvania for the trash pull. And Payne says he was not in Pennsylvania for the trash pull. She says she'll ask somebody else about that later. And the question goes, you had pursued interviews and surveillance video. Had you pursued evidence found inside the scene of the 1122 King? Yes, ma'am. What efforts did you make to pursue unknown male B? And then Payne goes, you have to be a little bit more specific. I don't remember exactly where unknown male B came from. I don't know if that's true or not, but I like that he asked that, because this is important. Because unknown male B is the male DNA, the blood DNA that's on the handrail that's been very vague about its location. Now, remember, let's go back, right? Back when we found out that there was unknown male DNA in the house, right? I said, well, they were super specific about the one in the glove outside of the house. Why are they not being super specific about the one inside of the house? Why aren't they, just said somewhere in the area where the bodies were found, right? I was like, it could have been anywhere in the house, right? And I was like, well, where? You said it was inside of a glove outside of the residence on the first one, but nowhere inside of the house did you say where it was. Why aren't you being that specific? It must not be somewhere important. Well, let's find out. So this is Ann Taylor. She says, if I told you the lab report showed unknown male B came from a blood spot, not a bloody handprint, not a large amount of blood, a blood spot on the handrail going between the second and the first floor. Now, she puts second to first so that you can think from the second to the third floor. No. This is the first floor handrail. And then she goes, from the second to the first floor, does this help you jog your memory? And he goes, yes, ma'am. So that DNA was on the first floor. What evidence do we have, or has anybody shown that Bryan Kohberger or the alleged killer ever left the second floor? There's none. In fact, he is seen walking out towards the back sliding glass door at a specific time. And then moments later, he is seen driving off in his Elantra. So he never went down to the first floor. And this is exactly what I said last week. I was like, and maybe I am psychic, guys. I don't know. Because I said last week, how are you guys going to feel when we find out that blood spot on that handrail was on the first floor? Did I know it was on the first floor? I don't know. maybe somebody told me that a long time ago. Maybe I figured it out a long time ago. Maybe I am psychic. I don't know, but I told you guys about 4 or 5 days ago, or the last time that we were on here, I said, how are you guys going to feel when we find out that blood spot, that speck, I think is what I called it, a little blood speck, a speck of DNA, very small amount. How are you going to feel when that is found on the first floor handrail? Now, that has nothing to do with this case. Absolutely nothing to do with this case. I told you guys. I'm not the kind that likes to just, say I told you so. But I'm getting tired of being, what's the word I'm looking for? Like putting out common sense, logical information and having some of these pro-burgers be like, oh, no, that don't work because of this, or I think this or that, or, coming in rude and disrespectful and all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, no, it doesn't make any sense. This is the logical explanation. And even though I'm right and I don't put it out there that way, these folks keep coming back. Well, now I'm going to put it out there that way. I did tell you so. I told all of you so. I told you guys a long time ago, all this crap that's coming out today. Long time ago. Had you been following for the pro-burgers, had you been following the right information and maybe the right person who's actually experienced in law enforcement like myself, who's been in law enforcement, who understands what I'm reading, who understands what happens in a criminal case, instead of some random guy in his basement, right? who really don't know what they're talking about. Maybe if you listen to the persons who maybe know a little bit about something, you won't look so bad right now when all this stuff comes out to be true, because it's everything I've said. And so do you think that that's not going to continue? You think that everything I've said so far up to this point has been accurate and truthful and 100%, that's all of a sudden going to stop when I say that this guy is Dunskies, it's him, and they have even more evidence against him? This is just the tip of the iceberg. What I know is just the tip of an iceberg compared to what law enforcement probably knows that are actually investigating this case. I'm just fortunate enough to have come in contact with some people in the area and a couple of different areas where Bryan Kohberger was at, who have reached out and gave me information. I am fortunate that some of the victims' family members trust me to give me information and talk to me and stuff. And I mean, they don't really give me information that they don't know. I mean, everything that they know is what we know for the most part. This gag order has been in place for a long time. And so it's not like there's a lot of information that they know more than what I know or anybody else may know. But I am fortunate enough to have a relationship with one of the victims' family members. More than one family member. But I digress. My law enforcement career allowed me to, what is it, like 6 degrees of separation on everybody. So just because, I'm a law enforcement officer or was a law enforcement officer in Texas doesn't mean that I don't have a connection with somebody who maybe knows something in Pennsylvania, Idaho, Washington, Colorado. I mean, those are also places that Idaho and Washington I've not visited. Pennsylvania and Colorado and a bunch of other places I have. And like I said, I've told you guys multiple occasions, this is what's happening. I told you so. I told you so. And you know what? I feel good saying that. I told y'all, pro burgers. I did. Why did you not pursue the person? At the point in time, we had already received Kohberger's name. And from what my understanding was, entering another DNA profile into CODIS would remove the previous one we had from the knife sheath. So memory serves, the discussion was to hold off. We'll stay with the one with the knife sheath. If we need to, we can address the unknown male B at a later time. And this is, remember, they're talking about at the moment when they sent for Bryan Kohberger's arrest warrant. All right. Why was unknown male DNA B unknown at that time? Well, they're telling you why it was unknown at that time. Does that mean that it's unknown today? No, because that is not what that means. Because the argument is that at the time that when Bryan Kohberger's arrest warrant was issued, did the magistrate know that there was unknown DNA in that house? And would that magistrate, had they known there was unknown DNA, still have signed off on the warrant for Bryan Kohberger's arrest? That is their whole argument. The argument isn't that is still today unknown. In fact, I believe it was Ashley Jennings who had reported in another hearing at the end where she had mentioned that they have done other DNA testing. So take that for what it is. Question. I want to make sure I understand your testimony. Were you not aware of unknown male B until after the 19th when you knew Bryan Kohberger's name? No, ma'am. I was aware of that before. How about unknown male D? Again, you're going to have to be more specific. If I told you unknown male D came from a lab report of a sample of blood on some gloves, that's plural, on some gloves, so a pair of gloves outside of the house. Does that refresh your memory? Yes, ma'am, it does. Are you aware of that too? Yes, ma'am. I want to back up and talk about the affidavits. All she says, are you aware of it? But she doesn't go into detail about it. All right. That affidavit, when you began, that was on December 23rd to get records. As far as when I started writing the affidavit, that's what you're referring to. It's because they switched it up. She goes back and forth and she goes all over the place. So here's where the affidavit. So remember when I told you guys that this affidavit was done in pieces? This is again something I said early on, like right when the PCA came out. I said that this affidavit reads as if it was done in pieces. It reads as if it went along the way, and that they put it together and it got confusing. That's the reason why it was confusing. I was confused by it. I'm sure a lot of you guys were confused by it. I don't fault anybody's confusion, but to me, it was because it was done in pieces. And as they investigated the case, and there was a copy and paste component to the affidavit where they had certain things done and they copied and pasted what they did on certain dates and times and put it into the probable cause affidavit. Should it have been done that way? Probably not. He probably should have ran in there with all the evidence and made a synopsis that was articulative and went step by step, and also had things that were pertinent to the investigation. There were some things that weren't in there, like the fact that he may have gone this direction or that direction after he had left the house, that clearly wasn't the direction that he went based on the information that they found out later. But this part of the documentation specifies that when it comes to the affidavit, it says here, Detective Payne says, I've been writing that affidavit along before. It was a running affidavit because at the beginning of it, there was a walkthrough of the crime scene. There were numerous things. It was a living document. So we just add information to it. I'd say the document started, I don't know. Couldn't give an exact date, a couple of weeks prior to that, even before we knew Mr. Kohberger's name. So again, this is exactly what I had said in the beginning. In the beginning. All right, let's go forward a little bit. I just wanted to bring up this part because the court goes, my concern wasn't so much that I had in front of me, it was an actual paper. My concern is littering the record with things that are not referred to, so that if you're going to refer to specific documents in there, that's fine, but don't expect me to be going and looking through things you don't refer to necessarily. So basically, she was referring to a bunch of things, or saying a bunch of things, but not referring to any documents. And Judge Hippler was getting kind of mad. I'd save some of these things in here, but I'm going to go ahead and just kind of pass through this because I have nothing really to do with the case. Let's see. All right, so now they're going to start talking about Dylan Mortenson. If I say DM, do you know what I'm talking about? He goes, yes, ma'am. The court says we're sealed. You can use their real name. Dylan Mortenson, who is she? She's one of the surviving roommates. And how many times was DM interviewed by law enforcement at the time that you wrote this December 23rd report? If memory serves, it was 4, I think 3 or 4, that she had heard Kaylee go upstairs yelling, someone is here, and run back downstairs. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. And you use the words she thought she heard. Do you remember that? Ms. Jennings, Your Honor, I'm going to object. I'm going to object based on the scope of what this testimony is supposed to be. My understanding is that it was limited solely to the issue of the Franks and the IGG. All right, so she's bringing in, I know why she's bringing in this stuff, but she's going to start, and Taylor at this point of the trial is going to start bringing in things like what they saw in testimony. And this is supposed to be about the Franks and the IG, specifically about the IGG, not necessarily Dylan Mortenson's testimony. And there's some objection here, and the court also saying the only issue we are at Frank's hearing is on the IGG. So he also agrees with Ms. Jennings. And she goes, well, let me start at a different place. And then she goes into how the 1112 video does not show enough of that vehicle that you could see whether there was a front license plate. So we find out that the 1112 King Road video. So we've seen a screenshot from the 1112 King Road residence that has that camera that screens up, that screws in, that light camera that shows the intersection of King and Queen Road. We've seen that screenshot of that image at 157. One of the things that I said was that it's kind of hard to that you can see that the cars that are parked directly in front of the home, you can see that they have license plates, but there's no lights coming from those vehicles because they are off. There's a vehicle off into the distance. Now that vehicle was parked at a house off of King, and I can't tell if it I think it looks like it has a rear license plate, but it's kind of hard to tell. It doesn't have the same reflective component that the ones up in the front do, that you can see that reflectiveness. You can't tell that from that distance. And then the third component of that is how are the headlights going to have an effect on the camera and what you can see as far as a front license plate. So it sounds like you can't see whether it has one or not. When you work with special agent email to identify the vehicle, there was more than one vehicle he identified. I don't believe there was. If memory served, it was just the Hyundai Elantra. They looked for the 2011 to 13. It's in their BOLO. So after Bryan was identified by IGG, expanded their search. Okay, so this is the preference. Again, this is where Ms. Jenny goes, object, Your Honor, for the same reason I don't understand the scope related to the IGG. So I understand the scope related to the IGG here. What they're saying is that the FBI expert that said it was a 2011 or 13 didn't change it till after they knew it was Bryan Kohberger's name. And so that's how they're trying to reflect this into it. But we know based on emails that on November 26th is when he opened it up to a 2016 Elantra. Okay. And I'm not going to go through all 175 pages. There's 175 pages of this. I'm only going to go through a few of them. We're at page 31, so we are going quite a bit. So just for that. And guys, I haven't been looking at the live chat. I will be looking at the live chat in a little bit to go over any comments or super chats or those type of things. So bear with me on that. That will be happening here in probably about another 15 minutes when I'm done with all this. So they start talking about why they wanted to go from Othram to the FBI. Let's see. So there were several of us. All right. So they just kind of go into who was there when the information about who Bryan Kohberger was. This is back on December 19th. And the 20th, there was yourself, Mr. Thompson was there, Darren Gilpson from the Idaho State Police, Ed Jacobson from the FBI. There were a couple of other folks from the FBI and ISP in the room. Don't remember exactly who they were. Let's see. They end up going into like quite a few different things here. Because a lot of it isn't like new information. And what I'm trying to do is just kind of keep this into new information stuff. Like a lot of this is like, how does IGG work? You know, what is it? Hold on. See right here, this is the next person that they brought up with is Rylan Nolan. And she's employed at the forensic laboratory manager with the Idaho State Police Forensic Services. And was originally hired to be a forensic scientist and has moved up, blah, blah, blah. And so they go into like the standards and protocols of like DNA and CODIS and things like that. There's not really too much information that I feel comfortable explaining because I'm not a scientist, to be honest with you. You know, we probably have to get somebody up here with IGG training to do those things. All right, here we go. So she goes, let's switch gears. In the case we are here for today, do you recall there being a trash pool? I recall receiving evidence, and this is one of the labs there that she is still I'm talking with, from a trash pool, correct? She says, you were looking for a male profile, correct? Did you find male profiles? She said, I didn't perform the actual testing, but yes, there was male profiles developed. How many? I don't know. Do you know anything about either male profile or any of them? I believe one of them was male profiles was designated as E, was determined they could be the biological parent or the child of the profile from the knife sheath. Are you aware that Bryan Kohberger's DNA was in the trash? The answer is, I was not aware. Did you become aware? I became aware later. We didn't have his name at that time. You didn't have his name on December 28th. No, I did not. This is one of the lab techs, so not somebody privy to that information. Okay, where were you on December 28th? Were you aware that the male E, but another male profile had been identified from the trash? I knew there were some mixtures of DNA that were also included. One of the mixtures, did it have a male DNA profile? The answer is, I believe it did. Question, and wasn't that profile the major component of the profile with a minor female? Answer, I believe that sounds correct. Question, later, didn't that return to Bryan Kohberger? Answer. Actually, we actually did not perform that comparison. Question. Do you and I have a discussion a few days ago? Answer. Yes, we did. Did you tell me that you knew that to be Bryan Kohberger's DNA? I said I thought it was. I could not find the report where it had done that comparison. I've since looked through, and we did not make that comparison, so cannot say that that was included in the mixture. So they found a mixture of DNA, and in the end, I think one of them ended up being Bryan Kohberger's. I don't understand how or why that makes a difference in this case. You know? All right, let's see. I need you to help me understand a little bit. I'm having a question because I understand that there was an unknown male B found on lab item 30. Do you know what I'm talking about? Answer, no. Question, okay, well, I understand that there was a cigarette butt taken from somebody in connection with the case investigation. Are you familiar with that? I am familiar with that. Question, what was that compared to the DNA on the knife sheath? Is that correct? Yes. And was that found to be excludable? Am I using the right word? It was an exclusion, correct? So would you compare something that was taken from somebody to an item of evidence? Is that right? Something that we have a secondary reference, as in someone identified it as they saw the person using that item and saw that dispose that item. That item was collected and used as a reference sample from that person because there was someone who said that is from that person. Question, okay, when you go to the trash to go through the lab, when you knew that you were looking for a male, right? Correct. And you knew that the male was and his family members lived in the house that produced that bag of trash. Is that right? Answer, yes, but not who produced each individual item in that trash pool. It wasn't labeled, this water bottle was from this person of interest, this tissue was from that sibling, or a Q-tip was from a parent. We didn't have that information. It was just, here are some items from a trash pool. And one of those items you took and developed male E. I did not, but yes, the laboratory did. In general, the lab developed male E, correct, and it was compared to male A and male E. There was a paternity statistic calculated because they were both single source profiles, meaning only from one individual. And that's all to say that they were able to figure out Bryan Kohberger through his dad. Hold on. Then they talk about where the DNA was actually found. Now, Ann Taylor she does a good job. She tries to confuse the lab assistant with it being on the top of the button snap, but it wasn't. It was in the bottom. On the top, they tested for, what was it? Fingerprints. Now, I don't know if there was a fingerprint found or not, but I do know that in one of the most recent documents, Ann Taylor spoke about a prosecution witness who specializes in fingerprints. So we can kind of put two and two together a little bit there, that maybe there's a partial there. Maybe there was a partial. Maybe there was just enough of something that, you couldn't put into a database that would have identified somebody. But if you had a suspect, that you had a small enough sample that you can say, all right, well, does this part of this sample match any part of this fingerprint? And maybe perhaps that's a different story. Let's see. But yeah, they ended up swabbing the top part or the bottom part and in other areas. And they do mention there being blood on the knife sheath as well. But I'm fairly positive that's probably the victims. All righty. Do you know if that sheath was part of preserved for fingerprinting? Swabbing was done first. This is our laboratory standard of order of processing. The DNA is needed and fingerprints, they will work together. Essentially, fingerprints will say we can see some possible ridge detail. If so, we can avoid this area. After DNA says that to swab this, they come to a decision that would be best suited. And so cross-examination, this is where Mr. Nye comes in, talked about the policies and procedures. Hold on. So they're going through everything that they talked about earlier with like Othram and the SNPs and when they sent that and who sent that. But at the end of the day, like when it comes to the IgG, the main reason I don't really care about it is because the IgG is completely separate from the STR profile that matched Bryan Kohberger. And so whether they did it right or they did it wrong or they did things this way or that way, it matched, right? And it was nothing to do with what they did there. The STR profile matched. So that's like the way you test if you did it right, the IgG, if you did it correctly, is if the person that they said that they believe is the suspect ends up being the person's DNA. That's how you test it. So if there was some DNA left on something and they do an IgG test and they come back and they say that it's me, right? And they go and they test my DNA to that sample, and let's just say it comes back that there's a that it's not me, that it's a close relative to me. Well, that means that they came close, but obviously didn't hit the bullseye. Right now, how do you know if they hit the bullseye? Is if they said it was me, they come and they swab me, and I get hit with 5.37 to 1 octillion chances that it's somebody else. So that's kind of how that works. He also gave, so here it goes. So the question, this is the prosecution's question. You also gave some testimony about the knife sheath and the swabs on the knife sheath. Do you recall that? Yes. I know you don't recall exactly where the knife sheath was swabbed, but you would have been talking about policies. Do your policies best practice suggest where a knife sheath or an item like that should be swabbed for DNA? No, it would be impossible for our NLX methods to cover how to swab or where to swab every single item of evidence. We received, it's quite wide varied items into the laboratory. So on this item, I believe there was also blood. So there would have been targeting that separated and then also trying to determine who may have handled that. So they would have specifically honed in on that area, whether that whoever handled it would have had to have touched it and maybe touched it repeatedly. And this is when they talk about, so why do you have to hone in on those areas in particular? Because that's the question that we're trying to answer. In forensic DNA analysis, the questions we're trying to answer is, can we link the assailant to the victim to assailant, or one or both in the scene? And so in this instance, my understanding is the sheath was found at the scene, so trying to link the possible perpetrator at the scene. Yeah. All right, so redirection by Ms. Taylor. We were talking at the end of my questions and where Mr. Nye just left off with you about where the sheath would have been swabbed. Reading my email, this has been placed right in front of you. Does that refresh your recollection? And she goes, very much so. Where was the swab? The knife was swabbed, the entire, the court said, did you say the knife or was swabbed? The witness says, sorry, the knife sheath. Am I allowed to read this? So she made a boo-boo. She said that the knife was swabbed, and the court stopped it and said, the knife or the knife sheath? And she said, I made a mistake. It was the knife sheath. Mistakes happen, guys. They don't have the knife. This is another example that they don't have the knife. I know that there was a mistake in one of the other documents that forgot the word knife, the word sheath, when they said that they tested the K-bar knife. And a lot of people thought that they had the K-bar knife. This is proof that they don't. The entire leather portion of the strap, both top and bottom, and then the undersides of the button. I misspoke. She did not swab the top of the button because that was determined to be the most likely place for fingerprints to be found. The underside of the button was the part that was sticky, that was the sticky out part would go into, or sticky part, or both. I can't tell from this. I would have to look at her notes. I couldn't tell what she was asking either. The sticky part out, sticky part in. It was underneath the button snap. So it wasn't on the outside end. It was on the bottom of there. And then that the FBI took over. Let's see if I have anything else. I think that might actually be kind of doing it. Because the rest of it is like, why did it go from Othram to the FBI? Does it matter? Like what does it matter? All right, here's a question. It says, when, let's put it in between. Well, when did they get the DNA to start with? They got the DNA November 22nd. So about a week after the murders happened, Othram had the DNA. And they were notified to stop the work. I believe the notification of the official was on December 10th. So They had it from November 22nd to the 10th. That isn't a very long time. I mean, you're looking at what, maybe 2.5 weeks there. And in that time, they've exhausted all their resources with who they had, and they gave it to the FBI. And then between the 10th and the 19th, which is roughly around the same amount of time, the FBI was able to utilize their resources or extended resources to find Bryan Kohberger's name. And so I know a lot of people are kind of looking at this like, oh my God, they only had X amount of time. How could they have, done this in this amount of time? Shoot, it looks like they did it twice. The first time they didn't come up with anything, and the second time they ended up finding some other relatives. And the crazy thing that it talks about here as well is it talks about these 4 brothers, and that these 4 brothers from Othram, right? That these guys were looked at as people, not necessarily as suspects in the crime, but as persons that you may want to get in contact with to submit DNA to get more information. Right. So basically, I don't think they believe necessarily that they were involved in the crime as much as they needed their DNA to get closer to the person that was involved in the crime. And they go into a huge detail about how, Ann Taylor goes through a great expense to make sure that we know that those brothers, that their last name is not Kohberger. And so if these people are related to Bryan, then they would have had some sort of maternal linkage somewhere down the line, whether it be his father's grandmother, his grandfather's mother, his great grandfather's mother, somewhere, or his own mother, somewhere down the line, there was a maternal aspect to these brothers that may have entered their information into a database. Let's see. So here it is. Okay, so what did you do in the relationship with the 4 brothers? And this is basically what I was just talking about, was the next thing. Because that was, in my opinion, I think that was the last thing that I had actually seen in here that had any real relevance to any new information about the case. Everything else is just kind of going back and forth about the schematics of cells and DNA extraction and all this other stuff, which, like I said, I am not a scientist on. Like, I would... And if somebody else is trying to explain these things to you that has no idea what they're talking about, and you fall for it, and you look ridiculous when, at the end of the day, when it comes to find out that the stuff that you were fighting tooth and nail for was completely wrong because the person that told you was wrong. Well, now you know why, because they try to explain things they don't know anything about. And I'm not going to do that when it comes to the forensic stuff like this. I have zero idea about SNPs and STRs and all those other things. All I know is that the STR profile is what is used to test against somebody else to determine if there's a match, and the SNP profile was used to determine a genetic tree. And that goes about as far as it, and I feel is comfortable saying. I am one of those that is, I know where my limits are as far as knowledge go. Don't want to go through it. Don't know it. Don't want to misinterpret anything. Okay. Hold on. Let me see what this was. This is a cross-examination of one of Ms. Taylor's witnesses. So you were accredited back in 2019 for forensic SNPs, correct? Answer is correct. We were actually doing forensic SNPs at the time. But you were working on forensic SNP cases prior to your accreditation, correct? No, we're specifically reserved working on these SNP cases until we received our accreditation. Man, I can't say that word. Do you recall describing the process in which as a chicken and egg problem? And they go back and forth, and he finds this post that this witness made a long time ago saying that it was whatever they're referring to was a chicken and egg problem. I don't know. I don't know what this has to do with anything. I just thought it was funny because they caught the witness for the defense lying so quickly and right off the bat. He's like, no, I never said these things. All right, well, let's look up at this. Is this your name? And is this what you said back in June 2020 about the chicken and egg problem or whatever? And so just wanted to point that out, that the defense's witnesses are already acting up. They're already acting up. Let's see. Yeah, I'm probably going to go through a lot. I didn't read the last 20 pages or so. Well, I guess I went this far. There's some more highlighted stuff. Yeah, so this is about the brothers, where it's talking about how the Othrams matches, where they're in their own words in their report, those matches were low. And this is about the brothers that Ann Taylor was trying to bring up. But it doesn't matter about those guys. What matters is the STR profile. Let's see. That was nothing. And I think that's it, guys. That is it. So let's go through some comments, some chats and things of that nature before we call it a show. Probably do this for the next 10 minutes or so. So send them out there. Put a couple of stars if you're on the YouTube side. I'm try to look at the ones here on the hey, there's Jaime. What's going on, buddy? On the TikToks. What's going on, Jaime? See a lot of people I know here. What's going on, everybody on TikTok? You see my green screen on TikTok. You can't see what apparently I have to wait and do so many deals here before my green screen turns into my normal screen. So if you want to see what that looks like, you can go check it out there. If he was carrying a bag, why bring a sheath? Stop being foolish. At the end of the day, you're trying to put reason to this person, but the reason why he's bringing a bag, obviously, is because he's going to be changing up clothes. Why is he bringing a sheath? Because if you put a sheath in a bag or a knife in a bag and you reach into the bag to grab the knife, there's a good chance you can grab the blade. And if you grab the blade, that's going to leave skin DNA, potentially blood, a bunch of different things that can happen that can really screw yourself. So, yeah, there's multiple reasons. The main reason why you bring a sheath is so you don't cut yourself. Now, if he's wearing some sort of like, jumpsuit material or Dickies work, jumpsuit, those don't have belt loops for him to put a knife sheath in. And so you're not going to want to leave your DNA and cut yourself, which he already did by leaving the knife sheath behind, which is ridiculous on its own case. But yeah, that's why you bring the knife sheath, my man. Now, let's see. There's plenty of DNA on the dark web. See, that's funny. Like, who do you want? So to say that there's a lot of DNA on the dark web, what are you implying? That Moscow Police Department or Idaho State Lab were like, shoot, let's, and in fact, I think it even said on here at one point in one of the hearings that was live or televised that the judge said, are you implying that that law enforcement went into a national database and changed the DNA sequence for Bryan Kohberger, which is something that I have been saying a long time ago. I said, if you think that this is some sort of frame job, there's some questions you need to ask yourself. One is who, what, when, where, and why, right? Those are the main ones you need to ask yourself. And the first one is like, when did they decide that they were going to frame somebody? Because if that decision, and why did they decide they're going to frame somebody? So if your thoughts are that it was taking too long, the semester was going to end, Idaho was going to, University of Idaho was coming back on, and they needed to, arrest anybody. Well, they had already put in somebody's DNA from the knife sheath back in the early part of this investigation into CODIS. So if they decided that back in January, they're going to have to go back in time or do something crazy, like changing DNA sequences off of a national database monitored by law enforcement agencies across the nation. Yeah. So that's what they did, right? They did that. And like, why would they do that? Like, why would they choose Bryan Kohberger? Moscow has like Moscow Police Department has a database of people they've arrested, right? You think that they're going to be like, man, all these people we've arrested, some of them are murderers, some of these people are predators, some of these people committed violent crimes. We've had one guy who had actually took a knife to himself and to his wife, who lived down the street from the victim's house, who was a convicted murderer who spent like 4 years in jail or 3 years in jail, and who had put the knife to himself and his wife a couple of days after the murders happened. That guy wasn't good enough to be a suspect. Brent Kopaka, the guy that the police took his life, who can't defend himself, that guy's not good enough. They got to go after the PhD student that nobody knows about because he's not from the area. And that makes a ton of sense. Makes a ton of sense. You can't put a knife like that into your pocket without a sheath. You know what? This does bring an excellent point. So one of the points was, how would he have realized that he walked out of there, or how could he not have realized he walked out of there without the knife sheath, yada yada? Well, if he threw the knife in a bag, just threw it in there as he was getting dressed, tunnel vision. You got to remember, a lot of things are going on, right? I know Mr. Rafasta, I don't know if he's ever committed a crime like this. Maybe he's talking out of experience or something, that he would have done something this or that better or worse. But, you have tunnel vision. There's a lot of things that are going on in this situation. I have been in high adrenaline situations, both, like, for those that aren't aware of my history, I was in the military, I was in law enforcement as well. I haven't done so in quite a while. It's been some time. I work for myself now, for those that are on TikTok that are watching for the first time. But years ago I used to do all those things, and adrenaline works crazy, and there's an adrenaline dump, and there's tunnel vision. There's a lot of things that go into play. And if this was the first time that he took the lives of anybody, to think that everything was in his mind was going like he was at a desk job, and you're out of your mind, dude. You're out of your mind. Let's see. I think AT was trying to prove to him that his case isn't going anywhere, and that he needs to try to make a plea deal. This is an interesting thing, because there's been a lot of things that are a statement here, Steph, because there's been a lot of things that Bryan Kohberger's defense team has done that I felt wasn't in his best interest. First one was moving away from Moscow. When they had Judge, that guy was like in their hand. He was their puppet. He was doing everything that they wanted. Judge Hippler, not been the same. Waiving of the speedy trial, putting out information before it needed to be out there, like the unknown DNA samples, that they were going to utilize those, whatever Cy Ray was going to say, all those things, putting it out there so early before trial, so that way that the prosecution can go and fix any mistakes they may have made, if any were made at all. Obviously, the defense could be exaggerating their words, and we have seen very many examples of that. And so, yeah. Now, could it have been that? Maybe. I mean, I think that's going to be his most logical thing to do. I know a lot of people, especially defense attorneys, have been looking at the most recent court documents, especially the ones about his mitigation expert that is going to testify that he had some mental problems. And so maybe even his family had some mental issues going back throughout his lineage. That may have been a reason to not utilize the death sentence on him. All those things that they're putting in there is usually some sort of sign that there perhaps may be a plea deal offer coming soon from the defense to take the death penalty off. And if they do that, it's going to be just like, I think it was Christopher Watts. He confessed, right? And there's still like a bunch of people that believe he's innocent, even though he's told everybody that he's guilty. I mean, same thing happened with Richard Allen. He talked about things that only the murderer would know. And yet there's still a bunch of people that think he's innocent, just even though there's evidence, there's proof, there's documentation and confession. Same thing probably happened here in the Bryan Kohberger case. He can confess, and there's going to be all these, guys that are out there who are in love and, love bitten, and are going to be hurt by that. And they're not going to believe it. They're not going to believe it. Does anyone feel like BK would take a plea deal? Would he take a plea deal? I mean, here's the thing, right? So one of the things that I have speculated, this is my own speculation, is that the illusions of grandeur are there with this guy. He spoke about it in his, was it Tappa Talk stuff, where he talked about having those illusions. He had conversations with his buddies. There was text messages that were shown, I think it was on Dateline, where he was talking about investigating high profile cases and stuff like that. If his goal was to be the next Ted Bundy, or this guy this infamous killer, right? And he wanted that notoriety. He would have needed to be either caught, convicted, or whatever the case may be. Because if Ted Bundy didn't get caught, I mean, you would just have the name, right? I mean, there's a lot of serial perpetrators or persons that are out there that commit crimes like this over and over again, who haven't gotten caught, or maybe perhaps never do get caught. and there's no publicity behind them. It's those that get caught that get the publicity. It's the ones that we know who they are and what their story is. And so if truly if his goal was to be something, to have something, his name up in lights, to be the next Ted Bundy, to have that, those, for whatever lack of reason, women that and men that love him the way they do in this weird way and manner. If he wanted that, then they would have had to have known it was him. So maybe, I really don't know. I think if his goal was to get away with it and not to get caught whatsoever, and maybe not. At the end of the day, what do you have to lose, right? Like, you can always plea out at any point. You're going to lose your life in jail regardless, whether you're there for the rest of your life and you naturally die, or if they give you a date in 40 years. By then he's 70 years old, right? Because when was the last time somebody was executed in Idaho? It's been a while. And I think that the average appeal time is about 20 to 30 years. And even Ann Taylor and the defense team has mentioned multiple times how this case doesn't stop with just a guilty verdict, and that there's going to be appeals, and that they're going to be doing this for years and years to come. So with that being said, I don't know. Maybe. At the end of the day, I think he won't see the light of day again. Let's see. Let me see on the TikTok. Supposedly there are 85 to 100 serial killers active in the U.S. I believe it. Oh, we have a new member. We have Gypsy Jody. Thank you for becoming a new member. I hope I didn't mess up your name there, but thank you for joining. I'm going to put out so what we do with our memberships, right? So guys, there are those on TikTok. If you guys want to, have more conversation with myself, I am on Discord, but the Discord is for our members only on YouTube side. So if you go over to the YouTube channel, look up DT Show or Drunk Turkey Show, is usually going to pop up the same, but we've changed it to the DT Show. You go in there, you hit join. I'm going to put it up here in a minute, where you guys can go and get on the Discord. You guys can talk with me directly, send me messages, talk as a group. It's a family. It's a lot of fun there. There's not too many, there isn't any arguments or anything like that. We do talk about the Karen Reed case, and that one can get a little bit heated every now and then, but it's all good. There's no, childish stuff in there. You're not going to see people making fun of people or being rude or disrespectful and things of that nature. Let's see. We have a $10 super chat coming in from Sirius saying, amazing live, and your arm is looking so much better. Thank you. For those that aren't aware, again, I have my hand looks like I'm shooting a free throw. My hand is stuck like this. For right now, I'm starting to get movement back into it. I did get hit with a lot of nerve pain and stuff, damage. Check search warrant results. The IDs were in paperwork from law enforcement early on. Yeah, there were some IDs inside of a glove, inside of a box. I remember that. I don't think in the beginning that he would have entertained a plea deal, and that's why you didn't see Logston. But she's have to prove he is facing a losing battle, and that's been proven. He might. Well, the only thing about that is that there was some other documentation that's been dropped off that they're going to be using. And I'm glad you brought this up there, Steph, because Becca Barlow is going to be the new attorney on the defense's side. And I think she has a background in like genetics and DNA and things of that nature. And so given her being added to the defense team leads me to believe there's probably not going to be a plea deal. And Mr. Rafasta, he says it's innocent until proven guilty into a court of law or something of that nature. And yes, he's got the presumption of innocence, which is why nobody's taken his life yet, right? That's where the presumption of innocence and being innocent are also two different things. Being presumed innocent doesn't mean that you have to come up with some mysterious bullcrap reasoning behind why he's supposedly innocent. It just means you can't punish him to the full extent of the law until he's been convicted by 12 of his peers. And so they have enough evidence to hold him because he is a danger to society. Now, he has that presumption of evidence of innocence. But again, that does not mean that he is innocent. That doesn't mean that, we should come up with random fake loser stories just to say that he's innocent. Like, maybe he got abducted by aliens, right? And then aliens had abducted somebody else, and that was the real killer. And when they abducted Bryan Kohberger and he was on the alien spacecraft with the other killer, they touched hands, and that's how his DNA got there. And they end up putting him in the wrong cars or something. I don't know. Something crazy, right? That doesn't mean that I have to come up with that story just so I can say he's innocent because he hasn't been convicted yet. That's stupid. No offense. But that's stupid to say. It really is. It really is that to say that we have to pretend he is innocent, and that anything that comes out, any evidence against him that comes out, we have to articulate and come up with some sort of story to say that he's innocent because he hasn't been found guilty. That's the first thing that's wrong with your statement. The second part that's wrong with your statement is that I'm not a jury nor a judge to say that I have to look at all the evidence or any of those things to make a decision on whether or not I think this guy committed this crime or not. I can tell you, I would bet my house and everything I own that this guy committed this crime. Not saying I would bet everything to say that he's going to be found guilty. There's two different things between being found guilty and committing the crime. There's been persons who have been found guilty of a crime who didn't commit it. That doesn't mean that they committed it. They've just been found guilty. And there's been people who have been found innocent of a crime who have committed the crime, but they are considered innocent. It just means that at the time that the state could not prove their case. Now, are there some people who are actually factually innocent? Yeah, there's that's happened. This isn't that case. And just because he is presumed to be innocent does not mean that I have to pretend or act like he is. And I won't. I'm not a child that does. I stopped pretending a long time ago. Also, why would he have anyone's ID? That's a good one. And we're going to end it off with that one. Why would he have anyone else's ID? Well, if the rumors are correct, from what I heard, that he did have some other people's IDs that didn't belong to him, and they weren't there by permission. And I'll leave it at that. Well, guys, I want to say thank you to everybody who's tuned in. Please give us a like. Please give us a subscribe. If you've been here and you didn't get the notification that we went live on the YouTube side, hit the like button. If you continue to hit the like button, that will tell the YouTubes that you like this channel, you like this content, and they'll continue to notify you every time we go live. So, that being said, guys, you guys have a great time. I'm going to try to figure out how to turn this off. And live, yep, on TikTok. So TikTok is now over 2 hours. And now, see you later, YouTube.